Hello, okay, this is part 2 of number 16, The Fall of the Roman Republic and the Rise of Parthia for History 231, Ancient Mediterranean World. And we left off last time having discussed very briefly the Parthian Empire, which is a fascinating place and an interesting time in history, but one which we don't have time to really cover in depth. The main thing to keep in mind is the continued evolution of Zoroastrianism on the one hand, and also the rise of, again, Persian power, not the old Persians, but this a new Persian power, the Parthians. And one of the things they had done, of course, was annihilated our friend Crassus in the Battle of Carrhae. Just totally destroyed him, one of the most lopsided defeats the Romans ever suffered. And this was a real disaster because, of course, at the time it happened, there's nothing the Romans can really do in response. The Parthians basically get away with it. The Romans cannot strike back because the two remaining power players, Julius Caesar and our friend Pompey, are starting to build up for their conflict. We now have two guys, each of whom has personal armies. Very, very bad idea. You should never let political types have personal armies, but they have personal armies. And these two guys are starting to ramp up for a conflict with each other. And it's going to be a very, very messy one. And so in order for this to work for them, they need to keep command of their armies. That's how they could be vulnerable to each other. All right? And keep in mind, these armies are loyal to them, not to the Roman state. Now, Cicero, who is one of our sources for this time period, says this was, and I quote, the greatest struggle history has ever known, end quote. This was a very big deal, and they knew it at the time. Something big is in the works, is going to be happening. Now, how do you solve this? How do you solve this without a massive, horrible civil war? That's the question that comes to mind. And the proposal that came up, and it is actually an extremely reasonable proposal on paper, was why don't Caesar and Pompey both surrender their armies, and then we can get back to normal and get this fixed. And that seems like an incredibly reasonable thing to do. The problem is that reasonable things are not always easy to do, because if one guy gives up his army and the other guy doesn't, that isn't going to work. You've got to have them both do this. And most people said this is a really, really good idea, except, of course, for the two guys that were in the position of power, Caesar and Pompey. Now, by 50 BC, things are really getting bad. And a rumor starts to spread that Caesar is going to take his personal army and he's going to march down to Rome, and he's going to do the one thing that makes the Romans crazy. Remember, the one thing that made the Romans completely nuts was the idea and the fear that someone might seize power illegally. Okay, this was always their big bugaboo, going all the way back to the time of their last king, again, who was such a horrible guy that when they ran him out, they put this rule in to make sure no one could seize power illegally. And people are saying, okay, what if Caesar decides to try and do this? Oh my gosh, this is a really scary situation. So this rumor gets the consuls, the guys who are theoretically in charge, but of course really aren't, to go to Pompey, and they say, listen, if he tries this, if Caesar tries to do this, will you defend Rome against him? And Pompey says, yes, I will do that. All right? Oh, good. So that means we'll be safe, they say. Okay. Well, on January 1st, 49 BC, Caesar says, okay, you know what? These guys who say we should all disarm, maybe they have a point. So he says, why don't me and Pompey both surrender our armies? He says, I'll do it if you do it. Okay? I'll do it if you do it. But all the guys back in Pompey are saying, I don't trust Caesar. No, you can't do it. So Pompey says no. So, of course, that doesn't work either. This puts Caesar into a bind. This puts him into a tangle. He's going to have to now deal with this. And he says, okay, it's time to take the initiative. Now, one of the things you've got to keep in mind about people in power is there are times they have to take the initiative. This is true of anyone in power. There are going to be times when the President of the United States has to take the initiative and just take the bull by the horns and just act. And oftentimes the presidents who don't act, even if their actions are not the smartest thing in the world, are the ones who really are the ones who have a problem. If you just dither and you don't do anything really, and you wait and you kick the can down the road and you say, oh, I don't know, I don't want to get people mad at me, those are often the presidents and the kings and the consuls and all these people for whom history judges very harshly, and things get very, very bad. Because if you take no action, it's often worse than taking the wrong action. Doing something is often better than doing nothing. And this is the problem here. Caesar says, if I do nothing, the situation is going to deteriorate. Eventually, I'm going to lose my command, my armies, I'm going to be in trouble. So I got to take the bull by the horns. And he was a decisive guy. He's a very decisive guy, and he says, okay, I'm going to take the initiative here. And this is what he does. He takes his army and he crosses over a little river in northern Italy, a little river called the Rubicon River. Now, there is a saying ever since, to cross the Rubicon. To cross the Rubicon is when you commit completely to something, because there's no going back. You see, the Rubicon River was the dividing line from between north, where Caesar had legal command of his armies, and south, where he doesn't. And so if he takes his army across the Rubicon, he's broken the law. And the only option he has once he crosses the Rubicon is go for it. He's got to go all out, and he's got to basically just grab as much power as he can. So when you say to cross the Rubicon, you're saying this is the point of no return. This is the point after which I can't go back. I cannot go back. I'm committed to whatever action I've decided to take. And if it's the wrong action, I got to go with it anyway. I've got to ride with it anyway. And that's what Caesar is going to do here. So whenever you hear someone say to cross the Rubicon, that's what they mean. It's a wonderful saying, and it's very, very valid in much of our lives. So this is an important thing. Now, this also means, of course, that you have a civil war, because Pompey and his armies are going to go up against Caesar and his armies, and it's going to get very, very messy. Now, Caesar is an ambitious guy. He acts quickly, all right? He acts quickly. Pompey and his supporters can call on 2 full legions in Rome and another 7 legions in Spain, a huge army that they could use to fight against our friend Caesar. And Pompey, remember, is the guy in command of Spain. He's the guy over there. The only problem is this. Something happens that nobody expected. You see, what Caesar has done is he's broken the old Roman rule, no seizing power illegally. He's broken that rule. And everyone thinks, well, that means the people of Rome are not going to stand for it. They do not stand for people seizing power illegally, so there's going to be a popular uprising against Caesar. That's what they're counting on, popular uprising. And the popular uprising never happens. Now, exactly why is hard to say, but my guess is the people of Rome, by this point in the situation, have decided, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out. I'm going to sit on the sidelines, and I'm not going to take any action. I'm going to just wait and see how this plays out, because it's not worth it to get involved. And that is unusual, considering the Romans were crazy paranoid about people seizing power illegally. But basically, the average Roman's like, yeah, I'm not getting involved in this. What do you think, I'm nuts? So they don't rise up against Caesar. And this catches Pompey and his allies off guard. And so Pompey and his armies have to get out of Rome. Caesar's closing in. They don't have time to do anything else. And so now Caesar gets into Rome. And then Caesar goes to Spain, and he eliminates Pompey's armies in Spain. By the summer of 49 BC, he subjugated Sicily and Sardinia. He even loses in Africa. It doesn't really matter. Africa is not really an important part of this. And this means Pompey is in trouble. Now, Pompey's counting on the east, and he organizes his forces in Macedonia, north of Greece, and he trains his forces in Macedonia, north of east. But Caesar, again, is a risk taker. He's a guy who goes for it. And he takes a huge chance, all right? And he ships 20,000 infantrymen and 600 cavalrymen across the sea, straight over towards Greece, in the middle of winter, which is a huge risk. One storm, it's over. He takes an incredible risk, and the gamble pays off, all right? The gamble pays off, and he crushes Pompey in the battle at a place called, let me see if I can pronounce this, Pharsalus, in northern Greece, all right? He crushes Pompey's army there. Pompey has to flee for his life. He flees to the island of Lesbos, and then he flees again to Egypt. Now remember, Egypt at this time is not part of the Roman Republic. It's the one big piece that's not, all right? Egypt is separate from the Roman Republic. It is still ruled by the Ptolemies. It's ruled by the descendants of the general of Alexander the Great. And at this point, it's ruled by, well, a brother-sister team, and they're having their own problems here. So Pompey flees to Egypt, and he marches in. He gets down to Egypt as fast as he can. He gets down there. The only problem Pompey had is he didn't take my class. And so he gets to Egypt, and he makes a terrible, horrible, awful mistake you must never, ever make if you want to defeat Julius Caesar. Yes, he gets himself killed. He's murdered on the beach when he arrives. He's murdered on the beach when he arrives here, all right? And that means Julius Caesar is the one guy left standing with any real power. He's got his army here. So Caesar arrives, All right, he arrives and he comes in and he says, wow, Egypt is a nice place. And I will tell you this, it is a nice place. I've been to Egypt, I've been to Alexandria, where Caesar sets up camp, and he says, this is a really nice place. And he's hanging out there. He's hanging out. And one day, as he's hanging out there in Alexandria, there's a knock on the door, and he opens the door, and there's these guys there, and they have this rug, and they say, hey, listen, you got a gift here. We've brought you this gift. It's a rug. And so Caesar says, oh, well, that's very nice. Bring it on in. They bring it on in. They unroll the rug, and who pops out? Elizabeth Taylor. Okay, not Elizabeth Taylor. She's the actress who played Cleopatra. Cleopatra pops out of the rug. She smuggled her way into Caesar because Cleopatra is in the middle of this fight with her brother. And they're fighting to be who's going to rule Egypt. Now, Cleopatra was a brilliant political mind. She is one cagey, smart character, and she realizes the best way to get rid of my nasty brother is to enlist the aid of the Romans, and the best way to do that is to get in good with their boss, Caesar, because Caesar's the guy pretty much now with all the power. And so what does she do? She goes in there and she basically seduces him. And Cleopatra was incredibly good at getting men to do what they want. There are certain women out there who are like this. They have this talent, and they can get men to do what they want. Even if it's not in the interest of the guy, they'll do it anyway. And Cleopatra is one of these very, very clever people. She was a brilliant, brilliant lady, all right? She's the only Ptolemy who actually knew how to read or speak Egyptian, for heaven's sake. She's smart. So she's got Caesar basically doing what she wants, and that means her nasty brother, well, it doesn't end well for him. She gets rid of him, which makes her the Pharaoh. Now remember, in Egypt, a woman could be Pharaoh. It didn't happen very often, but could be Pharaoh. So Cleopatra becomes Pharaoh, ruler of Egypt, and she and Caesar have an affair. They even have a child together. I mean, they're having a good old time here. They're having a good old time, and guess what? Good old Cleopatra gets what she wants. Very, very smart lady. Okay, so eventually, Caesar says, okay, listen, I got to get back to Rome and put things in order. Things are real messed up back in Rome, so he heads back to Rome, and he takes control of Rome. He's the only guy who can. He's the only guy with a real serious army. He takes political control of Rome. He has himself declared dictator. Now, you'll remember, the role of dictator was an emergency role. All right, in the Roman system, you could have a dictator for a short period of time in an emergency. And he has himself made dictator because he's going to try and fix all these problems that the Roman Republic has been having. All right, he's going to try and fix them. And the only way to do that is to have complete power. So he has himself made dictator for short periods in 48 and 47 BC. And then in 46, he says, okay, I just need 10 years. Okay, I'll just do it for 10 years. He's dictator for 10 years. And in 44 BC, he says, okay, listen, why don't I just be dictator for life? I'll just be dictator for life here, all right? In 46, he's made consul, never surrenders a post there. In other words, this guy has the power. He's got all the power. All the power. Okay, now what does this mean? What is his role now going to be? There is no place in the Roman Republic for a guy like this. There is no place for this. Now, he's very clever. He doesn't call himself king. He never says, I'm the king, all right? And he does make important reforms. He does make some important changes that needed to be made. This was important stuff. There are lots of problems. For example, he eliminated tax farming. Now, I've mentioned tax farming before. Tax farming is one of the stupidest ideas anyone ever thought of. Basically, a rich guy says, how much money can I get? How much money can Connecticut generate for the government? I'll pay the government that much money if I have the right to use the army to get as much money out of Connecticut as I possibly can. He will, of course, then extort everyone in Connecticut to get a profit. Tax farming is a very, very bad idea. There is no circumstance where it's a good idea. It's a very, very bad idea. And so he gets rid of this. He says, this is not a good thing here. He worries, he concerns himself, the poor. Keep in mind, one of the things that Caesar did really well was take care of and get the plebeians on his side. And the way he does it is by doing things for the poor. He says, we need to make grain cheaper so these people have food, these people have enough to eat here. All right? He establishes a system for the fair settlements of debts. He does things that need to be done. He makes good reforms. He convinces 80,000 citizens to migrate out of Rome, to emigrate out of Rome, and this helps to spread Roman culture all through the Mediterranean here. So he does this as well. He starts giving citizenship out to loyal provincial communities, folks that have been supporting him, folks that have backed Rome. He starts giving them citizenship. That's a big, big benefit that people really, really like. All right? So he's making a lot of good decisions. All right? He's making a lot of good decisions. But there is a problem. Remember, the Romans were kind of freakazoid paranoid about people seizing power illegally. And although the average plebeian's okay with Caesar doing this, a lot of patricians are not. There's a lot of people in positions of power, people in the Senate and places like that, who are saying, yeah, this guy has done some stuff you're not supposed to do. We're not okay with this. We're worried he's going to try and make himself emperor and king and rule over us. We don't like this, all right? We don't like this. Power is also beginning to affect Caesar himself. And this is an important point. Power affects your brain. A little power affects it a little bit. A lot of power affects it a lot. And people who have complete power, they tend to go crazy. This has happened a lot in history. All right, it's one of the reasons you do not want an emperor or a king with absolute power. It never really works. Remember, Alexander the Great started losing his mind there at the end because he had absolute power here. So a lot of people in the Senate and other places are like, we're not okay with this. There's a problem here. All right, this is a problem. So a plot is hatched, all right? Former supporters of Pompey that Caesar had forgiven, they said, okay, listen, guys, I'll let you off the hook here. Yeah, you backed my enemy, but I'll let you off the hook here, all right? And so what we're going to do, these guys say, is we got to eliminate this guy. We got to get him out of here, and we got to go back to the Republic, distributing power widely. A guy named Cassius, a guy named Cassius, not Crassus. Crassus was dead, but Cassius and Brutus, as well as others who had personal grudges with Caesar. You cannot get this powerful without pissing somebody off somewhere, all right? And so on March 15th, the Ides of March in 44 BC, these conspirators catch Caesar, all right, and they kill him. They assassinate him. They stab him to death. And that is the end of Julius Caesar, all right? That's the end of Julius Caesar, but it is not the end of trouble for Rome. And in fact, this just sets off another round of civil war and unrest and problems in Rome. And this is a really important lesson here. I don't care how much you don't like whoever's in charge. I don't care how much you may not like the President of the United States or the Premier or whoever the heck it happens to be. It really is only in the most extreme circumstances that you should ever think that political assassinations are a good idea. And we are nowhere, thankfully, in this country near that point yet. So assassination is not something you want to do. All right, not something you want to do. You want to try and change things in legal ways and under control and not let violence take over. Because once it does, it's hard to stop. Well, they kill Caesar. They kill Caesar, and now the question comes up, now what? We've done in Caesar, what are we going to do now? And that is going to be the big question.